Welcome to the Wrestling with Success podcast. In this show, you'll learn how to use lessons used in sports so you can use failure as your secret weapon for success and succeed in the real world. Here's your host, former Division I All-American wrestler, former Division I head coach, husband, father, adventure seeker, and entrepreneur, Jim Harshaw.
Welcome to episode 49 of Wrestling with Success. Today, I bring you Doug Muir. Doug is an authority in business strategy, customer development, and the business model canvas, having successfully built several multi-million-dollar enterprises from the ground up. He's considered the startup guru, and he speaks internationally on topics of entrepreneurship, innovation, and business growth. Muir teaches entrepreneurship at the prestigious University of Virginia, and including the Darden School of Business, which is one of the top business schools on the planet. What you won't read about Doug in his bio, though, is the incredible adversity that he's had to overcome to get where he's gotten to. Doug was a wrestler, and Doug shares both his story and tactics that you can use to overcome your own adversity. Doug, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jim.
We've got a lot of former athletes that listen to this of various backgrounds. I used to interview a lot of solely wrestlers. Now I've interviewed lots of different folks from all kinds of different backgrounds. Just had a former lacrosse player on the last episode. Got another wrestler in you, Doug. Tell us how you got started in wrestling.
So I got my start in wrestling somewhere about the 6th, 7th grade, and I grew up in outside Paterson, New Jersey, which wasn't the best place. With a family that to say it was a Stephen King novel gone sideways would be giving it justice. So I had a police officer who took a liking to me, and he said, "How would you like to beat up people?" And I kind of smiled. I said, "I'm in," right, without being getting in trouble. And he brought me to the Police Athletic League, the PAL, and there was a mat there, and they showed me wrestling moves, and I was getting my butt kicked, as you know, in the beginning. And I wanted to throw punches, but they weren't allowing me to do it. And before you know it, I just fell in love with wrestling and the intensity of it and the people that it brought around. And so that's how I did it. I went to DePaul High School, was trained by our friend Gene Mills. His brother Dale Mills was a very close friend of mine, and that was it. I was bitten, and I've been in love with wrestling ever since. And I really believe that it took me into my business world. I really do.
Doug, you and I have been friends for a long time. You've told me before that wrestling has saved your life. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
I can. So, growing up outside Paterson, New Jersey in the 70s, you had to be in gangs. And there were 3 gangs in the town, and my brother was the head of one of them. Unfortunately, he never made it out. He died with a needle in his toe. And I grew up with an alcoholic father, and all the abuse and the craziness that goes on with that. And so our neighbor who turned police officer was the one who saved my life, and he introduced me to a wrestling coach, and that was the beginning to be the success of my life. And as you know, at the University of Virginia, I'm very active in the wrestling community here because I do believe it saved my life. I became the coach of my son's high school team in a little island off the coast of Jacksonville called Fernandina Beach. And before I left, they were rated fairly high in the States, and I've watched it just change kids' lives that were going on the wrong track, just like I've seen it time and time again.
Yeah, so from Paterson, New Jersey, and what you just shared with us to where you're at now, Doug. I mean, it's absolutely phenomenal. And for the listener, I've heard Doug speak, and I've known his story for a while, and have heard him speak to other groups of entrepreneurs, and it's just absolutely amazing what you've accomplished, and just your sheer ability to break down information, simplify it, and tell in a educational and entertaining way. But can you talk to us a little bit about, so from where you left off, basically wrestling, to where you're at now. And I know it's been a long, long journey. Kind of give us the no pun intended, but the 30,000-foot view.
Sure. So what happened was,
because Doug was a pilot, for the listener, by the way.
and I started flying again, Jim. So make sure you clear the clouds.
Right.
So what happened was, after high school, I was floundering, and I had a couple choices: either go off into the abyss, or I could, for some reason, I knew that education was going to take me out of the situation I was in. And I had, I think, $200 in my pocket and a really beat up car. And I ended up driving, to visit a friend down at Daytona Beach, and he was going to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. And I said, "What do you do here?" And he says, "We become airline pilots." And I said, "Wow, that would be cool." He goes, "Dude, there is absolutely no way you're getting in." Imagine saying that to a wrestler. That will never, ever happen in my world. So that started the quest, that I started working, and I was selling suntan lotion on the beach. And I started working on my grades, and I got in. And so I got into Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, which is the #1 aviation school in not just in the United States, but in the world.
Wow.
And so what I did was I entered into a program that was based on math, which I was good at, and flight. It was called Aeronautical Science. It was half engineering, half flight. And you left with a science degree and all your pilot licenses. And that was the quest that I met. And that I did. And so when I got out, I was very fortunate to get on the airlines, because deregulation came in. And it changed. That really was the first phase of my life. And there's something that I learned from that, Jim. And what I really learned was, when I was negotiating the 89 contract for the union that I was working with at that time, I found out that the unions and the management were both very inefficient. And as I was flying, I found out I didn't like what I did for a living. And maybe your listeners could understand, and maybe they're in that position right now, and they're going to stay in this position for 20 years just because they make money. And once you get to that point in your life, it's really bad. And so what I did is I came up with a concept of building a restaurant. And once I built that restaurant, as you know, I took over a train station in Charlottesville, Virginia, and refurbished it. And that was the beginning of what was going to turn into starting 10 companies, of 7 which went to sale. 3 I own right now. And so September 11th came, and as your listeners probably know, there is a point in time where you're going to look in the mirror and say, who am I? And is this what I really want to do? And mine was flying by the World Trade Center on September 15th. In 2001,
wow.
Looking at the smoldering buildings. And I looked at my first officer. I said, "I'm out." And he goes, "You're out of what?" I said, "I quit. Life is too short. I'm not doing this anymore." And lo and behold, the airline I was flying with was laying off 1,200 pilots, and I was the first one in line. And I took it. And I took that adventure and that risk that athletes and wrestlers take. And I started a company, and it got absolutely massive and big. And 2 years later, in 2004, when they called me back, I said, I want to resign. And they said, "You got enough time to retire." And so I started the second phase of my life, which was entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship is a true art, and I love it. It's almost like watching you or watching Gene Mills wrestle. I was kind of a pit bull that pushed through things, and I just worked harder than everybody else. But watching talented people like you and Gene and my brother Dale wrestle is an art. And I think I have that in entrepreneurship. But the one thing that I am 100% sure of, that wrestling gave me the drive. When I started this Wild Wing Cafe here at the Amtrak train station in Charlottesville, Virginia, I remember the banker getting up on stage, and she said one thing. She says, "I always knew Doug was going to be in my office." And for 2 years, every month, he was in my office saying, "What else do I need? What else do I need?" And I tell my students this: if I would have quit at the 71st investor, what would Main Street look like today? Because the 72nd investor invested in me. If I would have quit at the 14th bank, what would have happened? Because the 15th bank gave me the money. So what I'm telling people now is to never give up, always see your dream, and to always move forward towards it. And that's been my life. And now It's all about giving back, which is phase 3 of my life. And I've been with UVA, just became a full-time faculty member, as you know, here in the engineering school and an adjunct professor at Darden. And I don't think I've ever enjoyed anything so much as teaching others how to succeed.
So how do you do that? How do you how do you go to 10, 20, 30, 50 investors and get turned down over and over and over, but just keep going forward? Because the self-doubt just piles up every time you do it. You go, well, gosh, these bankers, they see a lot of companies come through and, they're pretty experienced at what they do. And you got to think at least half of them know what they're doing, right? And know what they're talking about. And, maybe they got a point. Maybe they shouldn't invest in me. Maybe this isn't a company that they should finance or that anybody should finance. How were you able to do that? How were you able to keep believing despite, other well-educated, intelligent people telling you no?
That's a great question. And so I'm going to answer that in twofold. Number one, I remember when you came into my office and you told me your story and you said, I could not do one more push-up. I could not do one more pull-up. I could not shoot in on one more person, take one more person down. I couldn't. I reached my max, right? Do you remember telling me that?
Of course, yeah.
And you just kept going and going and going. And you weren't becoming an All-American until that one time when you did. And so I'm going to put that into the paraphrase of what it looks like from a business part. So for me, every time, what people do, and I found this out, if you ask somebody what they desire, they're going to tell you. If you ask somebody why they're turning you down, they're going to tell you. I collected, Jim, so much information from people turning me down, saying why. And most of it was the fear of the restaurants failing. That was the key. So I said, if I could plug up this fear, because I'm an airline pilot. I mean, what do I know except that I eat out 200 times a year? So that's how it all started. Right. But if you go before that, when I started my first company, I was flying with a captain. My wife called me up and she said, God, you got to stop talking to the kids. Our phone bill is through the roof. And our kids were 1 and 2 years old. Right. So they didn't understand me anyway. And my captain says, oh, my God. So mine was too. My wife just crawled up my butt. And then the flight attendant came up and says, my boyfriend said I can no longer call him. So I found the pain point. That was the pain point. And then I started interviewing people. And after about 500 of them, they all like, if you could lower my phone bill, I would join up. And what I did was I found a way to buy thousands and thousands and thousands of minutes at half price of what AT&T was selling it for. And then I repackaged it and I sold it to all the flight attendants and pilots. And I had 11,000 clients within my first year. So by just asking people what the pain point was, I was able to develop a corporation around it and sell it to AT&T. That was my first. My second then became Wild Wing Cafe because there was nothing up here in Charlottesville that was connecting the corner, as we call it, the University of Virginia, and the downtown mall. And there's about a mile of Main Street that was just absolutely dilapidated. And I came up with the vision that if I could take this train station and transform it, I could transform Main Street. And as you know, 15 years later, Main Street is transformed. So how do I take the nose? I took the nose as a not yet. I took the nose as a, if you correct this problem, then maybe I'll give you a yes. And it just took some time. It took 2 years.
Wow. Yeah, no, not yet. I heard an interview with Nate Carr, who was interviewed on Joe DeSena's podcast for Spartan Up, but he said next opportunity stands for next opportunity. So love that. And
there's so many people who take no personally, and I really, really don't. And there's another thing that I'm about ready to say to your audience, and it's not putting me down, but not being very bright. And we hang around with a lot of bright students here at UVA. I had no idea what to fear. Being bliss every once in a while is very good. I had no idea what to fear. And by grabbing onto mentors and learning from mentors, that was huge. And you have to keep an open mind, because when you're entering into a business like I do, if you think about this, I'm in the IT business. I own a large IT firm. I'm in the financial business. I have a financial company that's in 47 states. I'm in the restaurant business, and I'm in the consulting business. So having these four massively different types of businesses, I found out that by grabbing a mentor and somebody who's experienced in each one of these and hiring them on, that your chances of success are much, much greater. But where people get stuck, and when I was in the flight deck, people would say to me, either captains or first officers, like, how did you do it? And I wish I started like Nike. Just do it. Just start, right? Interview, as I call customer development, which is broken up into customer discovery and validation. Interview, and then execute. And that's it. It's really that simple.
So you mentioned mentors. We hear that a lot. How does one go about finding a mentor?
You know, they're going to be put into your life, and you just got to see them. My first mentor was the owner of the Amtrak train station. And the owner of the Amtrak train station here in Charlottesville, Virginia, took a liking to me. Now, you got to understand, there were two big, powerful restaurants that were bidding on this train station and me. And what did I know? But what I knew is that if I flew him down to Charleston, to the downtown Charleston Wild Wing Cafe on a Friday night, the sales pitch would be much easier, because then he could see my vision. And that's what he did. And when he came back, he said, okay, this is how we're going to do it. And he was my mentor. And I'll tell you what, Jim, he taught me a lot about the numbers. There's so many people out there that are starting businesses that have no idea what their profit and loss statement says, what their balance sheet says, and what their cash flow statement says. And Alan told me this, my mentor. He said, the people who own and understand the numbers win, period. And he was right about that. So as I was writing this business plan, he was drilling me on the numbers, which took me back to customer discovery, finding out what people really desired. And as I kept going back to people and iterating, I would change the numbers until they became refined. And when we opened up Wild Wing Cafe, I was about 10% below above what I thought I was going to be able to produce. And so the mentor, they're going to come into your life. You have to have A, respect for them. B, know that they have a knowledge that you will never understand until they teach you. And C, they have the time to mentor you.
Something really interesting that I want to circle back to that you talked about already. I've been around entrepreneurship for a lot of years. I've started several businesses. And one thing that I've really noticed that is key to all the successful businesses that I've really come across, outside of the ones who there are some lucky companies out there, you can't bank on luck. There are lucky people too, but the ones who are really successful, started from the ground floor and built them up, have gone through that customer discovery process. And it's as much a mindset as anything, because you talked about people around you that were talking about this problem, this obstacle, right? It was costing them too much. The phone bill was costing too much. They saw an obstacle, but you saw an opportunity. I mean, that's a mindset, and then you take that mindset and then you attach a name to it, calling it customer discovery. I think it's so important. That's like one of the biggest things that I've noticed that successful businesses have, is they've gone through that customer discovery phase. And this isn't an entrepreneurship show, but let's talk about that for a second. I mean, why is that so important to the customer discovery piece? Because you know what, Doug? I mean, for the entrepreneur listening, that's going to be really important. But for the parent listening, for the coach listening, you're trying to provide solutions for people, and you've got to understand the problem first, I think. So can you talk about that a little bit?
I sure can. If you even just read the front of your wonderful webpage, is Wrestling with Success. Success comes in two forms. One is financial and family success, which I've been blessed to achieve, but I've also been more blessed to achieve failure. That is massive. learning from failure or almost failing. So how do we reduce the failure? There's this thing called customer development, which is broken up into 4 phases. Let's just stick with the 2. The first is customer discovery. So that's going out and talking to people, not even telling them what you're thinking about selling, not even showing them anything, just asking what their pain points are. So let's use another company I have called Credit Justice Services. It's one of the largest credit restoration companies in the United States. So with Credit Justice Services, I used to own one of the largest collection agencies in Florida. And if you want to talk about just beating up on people, it is terrible. And I crushed probably about 500,000 people's credit throughout the years that I've owned it. And when I sold that company to a Wall Street firm, I said, I got to correct this problem. It's absolutely disgusting. And what I did is I started this company called Credit Justice Services. But what did I know about the credit repair? Well, I knew how to crush the credit, so I wanted to know how to clean it up. And what I did is instead of doing what everybody else does, which was 3,478 credit repair companies, they were all marching to the same drum, going to the same end user. I said, how could I have another distribution channel? And I said, what happens if I was sitting in front of a mortgage broker and he just turned me down because of my credit? Bam, there's a pain point. That's the pain. So I started interviewing mortgage brokers throughout the Sarasota area. And they were all, I was saying, if you had a magic wand, you can clean up 3 things in this business. What would they be? And they said 1, 2, 3, all of them without thinking. So then I started doing big events. They were called lunch and learns. And I would invite these mortgage brokers to these lunch and learns. I would buy them lunch. And I would say, again, if you had this magic wand, what would it be? 1, 2, 3. And they all, without hesitation, were talking about helping clients clean up their credit. So now I have over 500 people telling me what their problem is. So I went back and I started doing customer validation. I came up with a small website and I came up with a back end and I started learning about the 3 credit bureaus by myself by destroying my credit and learning how it worked. And from there, I went back to the mortgage brokers and I said, look what I've discovered. If I could achieve this for you, would this be something you would be interested in? And they all looked at me and said, oh my God, if you could do this and I can make money at the same time and become an expert with credit, I would call you Moses, as if you parted the water. And so what I did was I executed that plan. And when I executed that plan, I became it was almost the 4th largest within 2 years. And it was just amazing on how fast we grow. Now, of course, people were trying to copy me, but I did a couple things that will protect you from copycats. And that's by getting trademarks. That's by getting patents. That's by doing stuff legally that you could do to keep out your competition. But by doing that customer discovery first and then doing the customer validation saying, I heard you. Now, this is to validate what you just said. And they're all like, oh my God, this is it. That's how it's worked for me. And I've even done that in a restaurant, Jim, as you know, with my new concept, Bella's Restaurant. Right. I put a picnic table in the middle of the floor. I invited 15 people over. I flew my mother-in-law in from Rome, Italy. She talked to my wife. My wife would translate to English to the chef, and they would cook. And thank God we did this because the first 2 weeks, everyone's like, wow, this is too strong. This is too saucy. We don't like this. The American taste bud was different than the Rome taste buds, right? So if I would have opened up then, I would have failed. So I kept on iterating the sauces and iterating the food. And by the time 6 weeks came, I was winning 98% of the time. Yeah. And so I made the menu. I opened up. And as you know, we're an instant success. We've been around for 4 years. Yep. So the customer development and validation process to any company is absolutely huge. And people could read about this on my LinkedIn page if they want under Douglas Muir. And I've written 10 articles for LinkedIn on the customer development phase of before you even start a company, before you even start a business plan. And it's been hugely successful, especially for small businesses like the people that are listening to you now. If they're thinking about developing a company, they could do this. And it would give them an 80% better chance of success over a 5-year term than not using it. And those are the stats.
Yeah, man, I believe it. I've seen it. I've felt it. I've experienced it both on the success side and on the failure side personally in entrepreneurship. And it's such a powerful, important part, and it comes down to, it was Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Successful People. I can't remember the title of the book. But one of them is seek first to understand, then to be understood. It's listen, it's stop, listen, pay attention, listen to your potential customer, listen to your spouse or your kids or your employees or the people around you. First, listen, and then you can come up with a solution. We sometimes try to create the solution before we truly understand the problem. So seek first to understand is such a relevant message for anything that we're doing in life. So thank you.
And Jim,
Doug.
There's a perfect example of that, and I teach it in one of my classes called Web Van. And they came out and they wanted to deliver products and services to everybody around the world in the early 1990s when 10% of the household had computers. And they went out and they raised $800 million.
Wow.
Without talking to one person.
Oh.
And they burnt through it. And they went out of business 6 months after they opened.
Unbelievable. Oof.
I know. 800 million.
That's absurd.
It is.
Doug, you can hear it just talking to you over on a podcast. If people are listening, they can hear your energy. I've seen your energy. I've experienced it watching you speak to a crowd, sitting in your office and chatting with you. You have the energy, the drive, the passion, and it's easy for the listener to go, yeah, well, Doug just has it. You have that personality. Like you said earlier, you said you were a pit bull and you worked harder than everyone else. Like people think, oh, it's just easy for Doug, right? Because he has that personality. Well, I want to say first, there's a lot of people with that, intense personality like you have that never get out of the basement. But then there's also people who are really quiet and reserved that are really successful. So it's not, I want to make sure people don't just kind of go, well, Doug just had it. Yeah, he started from a really tough spot and he grew to here, but it was easy for him because of some other circumstance. Well, I mean, what did you do? What do you do? What's a takeaway that the listener can have? Something that will help them move towards success. Maybe it's something they can apply in the next 24 to 48 hours. But what can they do to start moving towards creating massive success in their life, Doug?
Success is information. Finding out as much information as you possibly can about what you're doing. That is step one. If you see that there's a problem, find out what the problem is by just interviewing. And as you start interviewing people, as you start talking to potential clients, as you watch their eyes light up and their pupils get big and they get all excited, that gives you an excitement. That's number one. Number two is by doing the numbers, learning how to do the numbers is the second most important thing. And then the third thing is your excitement is going to carry over because you know that people need what you have because you've interviewed 500, 5,000, 5 million people, whatever it is. And then you just do the execution plan through the numbers. That's how easy it is. I teach in the engineering school. These kids never raise their hand until the end of my class. By the time they're done with my class, they're all over entrepreneurship. They're all over interviewing and finding out customer discovery. So it's just going to the people that you think could use what you have in mind to correct a problem. We call it a pain or a gain. What is the pain and what is the gain? And by doing that, that's going to excite you and give you the momentum to move forward. Start finding the information first, then move forward.
Excellent advice, actionable advice. Doug, how about a book or a resource? Anything you can recommend that has been really influential for you?
From Good to Great, that was a phenomenal book. And How to Influence People from Carnegie.
Oh yeah, that's my favorite book right there.
Yeah, that is huge because I got to tell you, it's all about relationships. People like doing business with people they like.
That's right.
Learn about people and how to deal with them, and then the success will come. Believe in yourself.
Yep. Yeah, that's my number one favorite book, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie.
That's it.
All right, Doug, last question. If you could sit down with your 20-year-old self, sit down at a table, look eye to eye with your 20-year-old self, and you could offer yourself one piece of advice, what would that be?
First thing I would say is I'm not a piece of crap, as I was told my whole life, right, growing up. That's one thing. The second thing I would say is that life is a marathon, so relax. And the third thing I would say is that believe in yourself and reach for the stars and never stop, because once again, number 2, life is a marathon.
Beautiful, man. That's excellent stuff, Doug. How can the listener find you, follow you? What's your website and any other way that we can check you out and keep up on what you're doing? And certainly for the listener, I will share any links and resources and a lot of quotes and everything that Doug just talked about at jimharshawjr.com/49 for episode 49. That's jimharshawjr.com/49. I will have links to. Certainly, Doug, you mentioned your LinkedIn profile where you shared 10 articles you have written there and some other stuff. But anyway, go ahead.
Yes, they can get me at DMUIR at muirandassociates.net. So it's dmuir at muirandassociates.net. I get hundreds and hundreds of emails every week requesting information about entrepreneurships and ideas and financing. As you know, I own an angel fund, and so I do a lot of financing for startups. So please feel free to email me. And I think Jim just taught me how to do an iPod, everybody. So I'm going to try to become podcast. So I'm going to try not to be technically challenged and see if I can do this myself.
Yeah, man, you're cut out for podcasts. This is awesome. I'm gonna recommend you some other folks because I've always loved listening to you speak, and having you on the show finally has been awesome too. So, Doug, I appreciate you making time.
Thanks, Jim. Good luck to you. Keep up the good work.
And for the listener, episode 49, so jimharshawjr.com/49 for all the show notes and the download there and everything that Doug shared with us. And until next time, just like when you were an athlete, take the time to get clear on your goals and embrace failure as a stepping stone on your path to success.